confusion sometimes between Free the Girls and Free Our Girls. So Megan will get people saying, I have bras for you. She's like, that's awesome, but Free the Girls needs them. And we'll have people approach us, oh, I need this education and training. Awesome, go to Free Our Girls. So we're excited to share a really similar name and very much a similar passion. So please give a warm welcome to Megan Lundstrom.
Free Our Girls provides awareness, prevention, and response programs not only here in northern Colorado, but nationwide. We provide services and support to girls and women and their families who have been sex trafficked domestically. About approximately 3/4 of domestically sex trafficked females are adult women, yet there's very few resources that exist for them. And Free Our Girls is focused primarily on serving this demographic. Free Our Girls was born not even 2 years ago, and in that time, our network of pimp-controlled, sexually exploited women that we are in contact with and support in their journey to freedom has grown from less than 300 to over 1,000. 2 years ago, I began developing and researching a theory that the game, which is what pimp-controlled sex trafficking is referred to, is a cult, as it meets all 15 characteristics of a cult. Free Our Girls operates from the model that victims of pimp-controlled sex trafficking are cult members, and therefore our approach requires an intensive process of jump-starting a woman's ability to think critically and independently once again. The development of this theory is proving not only successful in the lives of the women I'm so fortunate to touch, but it has also given me a sense of framework and understanding as to what happened to me as a survivor myself. As survivors, we spend a lot of time sharing our story, which typically involves outlining the factors and events leading up to our victimization and highlighting some of our experiences during our time of exploitation. But so rarely do we hear the journey to restoration, which unfortunately fuels the public belief that once a rescue or an escape occurs, the individual moves easily into a life of abundance and freedom. This is unfortunate both for the movement and for the individual, because it dismisses the fact that finding one's freedom is not a single event, but in reality a process that can take years. I find this belief to be true, unfortunately, particularly within the church, this confusion between forgiveness and forgetfulness. In the book, The Wounded Heart, by Dr. Dan Allender, he explains, to be told, the past is the past. We are new creatures in Christ, so don't worry about what you can't change. At first relieves the need to face the unsightly reality of the destructive past. However, as he continues, hiding the past always involves denial. Denial of the past is always a denial of God. To forget your personal history is tantamount to trying to forget yourself and the journey that God has called you to live. You see, sexual trauma is not only physical trauma, it is soul trauma. It has a lasting impact on our lives long after the danger has passed and the physical wounds have healed. Dr. Dan Allender explains further, the damage of past abuse sets in motion a complex scheme of self-protective defenses that operate largely outside of our awareness, guiding our interactions with others, determining the spouse we select, the jobs we pursue, the theologies we embrace, and the fabric of our entire lives. This damage, then, is why when a woman first begins her journey to freedom, she might see herself as permanently damaged, shattered even. She feels she is no longer able to serve her original purpose, or maybe any purpose at all. And when those around her surround her to help her, her sharp edges may cut unintentionally into those who genuinely want to see her restored. And sometimes, even when all of the pieces have been glued back together into something that resembles what she used to be like, there are still cracks that prevent her from feeling whole. To a survivor, those hairline cracks are a lasting reminder that others can see that they are broken, that they don't just quite measure up, that they will never be normal. There's an ancient Japanese art And I'm not going to try to pronounce the Japanese word. The translation means golden joinery or golden repair. It is the art of repairing pottery with gold lacquer, with the understanding that the piece is actually more beautiful for having been broken. The belief is that when something has suffered damage and has a history, it becomes more beautiful. This art acknowledges the cracks rather than pretending they don't exist. It accentuates the previous damage rather than trying to conceal it. This golden joinery, this is God's healing in our lives. It doesn't happen overnight. It is at times a tedious and painful process. But healing from the trauma of trafficking is possible. And Free Our Girls and our flight program is just one of the ways that we are able to offer hope and a path to freedom. Thank you.
So starting closest to me, first is Michelle Bishop from Truckers Against Trafficking. She's the program coordinator there. So hello, Michelle, and welcome. Next to Michelle is Beth Bruno, founder and director of A Face to Reframe, manager of Domestic Anti-Trafficking with You Count campaign, co-founder and facilitator of the Larimer County Anti-Trafficking Community Response Team, and Concerned Citizens Against Human Trafficking. That's a busy woman. Welcome back. And Hava Simmons, Supervisor Family Partnerships Unit of Larimer County Department of Human Services. Welcome, Hava. Next to Hava, Chris Bruno, founder and executive director of Restoration Project and owner of Restoration Counseling Center. Welcome, Chris. And Scott Rogers, chief investigator for Larimer County DA's office, District Attorney's office. And last but certainly not least, my friend Allison Myers, program director of Streets Hope. Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate your time and appreciate your dedication. I think you're first, Michelle, so take it away, and then after Michelle, we'll just pass the microphones down and have each of you take a few moments to engage us and educate us. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for having me. I am with Truckers Against Trafficking, and I want to tell you a little bit about what we do. But first, I want to start off and get us kind of all on the same page about what human trafficking is. A little bit of a human trafficking 101 here. And yeah, I have slides, so that's great. So up on the screen, you will see a definition of human trafficking. It's just a very general definition. Basically, it says human trafficking is the exploitation of human beings via force, fraud, or coercion for one of two reasons. The first is labor trafficking. Here we're thinking agricultural work, we're thinking domestic servitude, sweatshops. Anytime someone's being forced to work against their will, forced to work long hours, and forced to work without pay, that's labor trafficking. And that's one reason why people get trafficked. Another reason is for commercial sex. So here we're thinking pornography and prostitution, stripping, anything within that commercial sex industry, someone can be trafficked into. And all of this trafficking, all of this exploitation happens for the profit or the benefit of a third party. Usually that third party is referred to as a trafficker, an exploiter, a pimp, if it's sex. That's what's happening. And so when you look at that definition, you can really see that this is just a form of modern day slavery. It is slavery, and slavery still exists in our world and in our country and in our communities. And so just to kind of get a scope of how big this problem is worldwide, here's some statistics up here. The first one, there's about an estimated 21 million slaves in the world, and that's from the International Labor Organization. And I will say that's a very conservative estimate. I've heard anywhere up to about 36 million. It's very hard to track, very hard to estimate, but that's still a very large number that shouldn't exist. It just shouldn't exist. And if you want to know why it exists, second statistic, it's a $150 billion industry. This is the second largest criminal industry in the world, following drugs, and it's creeping up. And so it's huge. There's a lot of money that criminals are able to make, and so they're not stopping. They're growing. To bring it more into a domestic side, into our country, there have been documented cases in all 50 states as well as DC. It happens everywhere. It happens in every single state, in every single city, in our communities. It's happening. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children estimates that about 1 in 6 runaways is at risk for being trafficked. And when someone is trafficked, they're forced to have sex up to 20 times a day. This means that victim is forced to have, or is raped 20 times a day. That's what it is. It's rape for profit. So that's what's going on. And so if you're like me, you kind of sit and you look at this and you're like, how is this happening? We live in the 21st century. I thought slavery was done with the Civil War. What's going on? And it's what we like to call the perfect storm. It's a lot of factors acting together. And so the first side, or the first factor you have, is you have vulnerable communities. You have people who are vulnerable. A lot of times you have runaways, young women and children who have run away from home, run away from a bad situation, that they think anything's got to be better than what I'm dealing with right now. But they don't know what's waiting for them when they run away. But it doesn't always have to be a runaway. There's just some sort of vulnerability. Now that we're in an internet age, you have predators going onto social media and pretending to be someone else, and trapping people that way. And so you have a vulnerability over here and someone who's wanting to exploit that vulnerability on the other side. And above all of that, you have a culture that, I wouldn't say has promoted it, but has kind of said it's okay. If you look at that top right picture where it says "Pimp Your Pack," that's an advertisement aimed at children, and it says, "Oh, do something cool with your backpack, pimp your pack." But what's a pimp? A pimp is a person that sells someone for sex. A pimp is not something to be emulated. It's not something that we should want to be. It's not something that we should promote in our society, and yet we're using that term as something that's positive and good and something that we should be striving for. You also have pornography that's playing into it. This is what I like to call the gateway into commercial sex. It's driving demand for commercial sex, and unfortunately, if there's a demand, if you know economics, there has to be a supply to meet that. And that's kind of why trafficking is really, really coming up, because there's not a lot of people that are volunteering for that job. It's just, there's not a lot of volunteers for that. And then, like I said, there's a lot of money to be made, and organized crime is coming into it. They used to sell guns and drugs, and they can sell that once, but they can sell a human being over and over and over again. So there's a lot of money to be made in this industry if you want to call it. And so it's kind of this perfect storm of things that are happening that shouldn't be happening. And so given all of that, kind of coming back to what I do and what my organization does, we looked at that and we said, this isn't right, this can't continue to happen, we need to do something about it. And we kind of looked at the trucking industry, we were very industry specific, and we said, the trucking industry, given its sheer size, the extensive travels that it does, and just the diligent nature of their job, they're trained to keep their eyes and their ears open while they're on the road. This could really become a force for good in this world, and an army that could be raised up, provide an extra set of eyes and ears on the roads for our law enforcement. There are oftentimes, and there's a list up here, and this list is not exhaustive, but it's some of the main places that truck drivers can often come into contact with victims of human trafficking. And so if they're in these places and victims are in these places, why don't we train them to know what to look for? Why don't we train them to know what questions to ask, to know what signs to look for, and then to know what to do about it? It's great that they know what to look for, but what good is that if they don't know what to do? So that's kind of why we started, and we kind of were like, imagine if every single driver, and there's 7 million people in the trucking industry, so this is a lot of people that could be a force for change. So what if every one of those 7 million people was trained to know what human trafficking looked like and knew what to do in response to it? Imagine how many more victims could be rescued or could be identified, and how many more pimps could be arrested. So this is our goal, and our mission is to educate, equip, empower, and mobilize members of the trucking industry to combat human trafficking as part of their everyday jobs. Not something extra that they have to worry about and do, but just part of everyday jobs, taking that extra minute to look around and see if there's anything suspicious going on. So we do that through 3 main goals, and I'm going to breeze through these. The first is to saturate the industry with our training materials. We have a training program that we deliver to companies, to trucking schools, to shippers, to dealerships, to anyone who's got a touch point into the trucking industry. We give them our training program, and we ask them to train their drivers or their employees to know what to look for. We have wallet cards so that drivers can take them on the road with them and be reminded of the information. Decals that are on the window so that they have that national hotline, the National Human Trafficking Hotline number right in front of them, so they're reminded to be looking out when they're at their stops. So that's our first goal. Our second goal is to work alongside law enforcement. Because we can't go out and arrest pimps. We just don't have that possibility or that power. Truckers don't have that power. Law enforcement has that power. And so we need to work in tandem with law enforcement. And specifically, we really work with the law enforcement that has a direct contact to the trucking industry. So motor vehicle enforcement is usually who we're partnering with and connecting them back to the trucking industry, creating those coalitions essentially, or those connections, so that those loopholes that traffickers like to get through, those are closed and they can't get through them anymore. And finally, we marshal the resources of the industry. We're a small organization and we're grassroots. We just can't do it by ourselves. So we need the industry to come alongside of us and to take up this issue as their own, and bring in other key industry stakeholders, talk to other people in their communities, train their drivers, all those kinds of things. Just marshal the resources, because there's a lot of them, and in order to grow, we need to do that. So that's us in a nutshell, and I will pass it along.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. So how do we take that fabulous overview of what human trafficking looks like and apply that to a community like ours? What are we seeing here in Larimer County, and how are we responding? And I want to say that we're in a really different place now than we were 3 years ago. 3 years ago, the majority of our service providers and law enforcement and first responders had not received training on human trafficking, on how to recognize the signs and the red flags and identify. And if they had received training, many of them had received it at a national conference or out of state, or had pursued it out of their own interest. Such was the case with 2 Fort Collins police officers who 3 years ago did an operation through a human trafficking lens. And that was really the first investigation in Fort Collins that was handled as a potential trafficking case. They closed 2 Asian massage parlors on College Avenue, where they believed that a number of women were being trafficked to provide sexual services. And it was out of that experience, out of that operation, that really brought to the forefront in our community the state of things. Not only the state of the problem that we were seeing, that yes, there are Asian massage parlors, we still have 10 to 15 in Fort Collins alone, but also the state of things of our service providers who would actually be interacting with those potential victims. Because we realized that we were ill-prepared and we were not yet ready to handle any kind of trafficking investigation. And so in partnership with the Fort Collins Police Department, we launched this Larimer County Anti-Trafficking Community Response Team. And the goal for that initially was to make sure that all of our frontline professionals knew what they were already looking at, understood that when this and this and this work together, that is what that is trafficking, and knew and understood how to properly identify the clients that they were already working with. So we began meeting quarterly and started by training all those types of people: social workers, youth workers, health professionals, educators, school resource officers, law enforcement, all the kinds of people that you would imagine would most likely intersect with potential victims. And we worked on getting them trained. And we've been doing that for the last 3 years, and that's why I say our community is in a really different place. Because now all of those people are responding in their professional positions in ways that they can best respond, and they know now what they're seeing. And what we hear continuously from those individuals is that looking at their clients through a different lens, they see things differently, and they realize they've been looking at trafficking for quite some time. Because in a community like ours, we're not just looking at Asian massage parlors. We're looking at incidents of labor trafficking and things like traveling sales crews, where we have young adults knocking on our doors who are maybe involved in a labor trafficking scheme. We have young people, youth, who both Hava and Scott will speak more to, who are incredibly at risk and are running away and are experiencing trafficking, or have, or are about to. And so we know that we need to do incredible work in preventing that. If we can train a school resource officer, for instance, to look at one of the young girls that he's already in a relationship with, and look at her and realize she's dating this older guy, and she's disappearing from school every day, and whenever the phone rings, she's panicking, and there's more to this story, and now he knows the right questions to ask, he can prevent her from being trafficked, or he can stop a bad situation from getting worse. So that's what we've been working on as a county-wide. About a year ago, we launched a public version of that same group, recognizing that there are a ton of other groups and individuals who are also engaged in raising awareness and advocacy and fundraising. And so that's the Concerned Citizens group that you are all welcome to come to, and can find out more information on a Face 3 Frames table in the lobby. But really, as we began training more and more people, we realized we have to look at those we would identify as being most vulnerable. And in communities like ours, that is our youth. And so Face 3 Frame has gone about that in a couple of different ways. We have 2 small youth groups that we started this year, a youth leadership board and a youth photojournalism group. Both of those are aimed at equipping and empowering students to be peer leaders around this issue. Right now that's drawing from only 3 high schools, and those are small groups. So we also have a broad exposure strategy. That is having strategic intervention with those youth we would deem to be most at risk. A lot of these are Scott's kids that he'll talk about, but these are kids who are already exhibiting high-risk behaviors. We want them to know and understand their risks and vulnerabilities. So getting them the right training to recognize how they might be trafficked. And then also just broad exposure, all of our kids, all of our youth, because really no teen is immune from their emotional needs being exploited and manipulated by a trafficker. And we want them to understand that in a community like this, we're not as worried about them being yanked off the street and shoved in a car and locked in a closet. We're worried about an older girl coming to them and offering a really lucrative job opportunity, or an older guy who promises to be a loving and protective boyfriend and then isn't. And so we want kids across the board to understand how they too are vulnerable, not only to protect themselves, but to really be the eyes and ears among their peers in ways that we adults will never be. So that's some of the ways that we are going about prevention and community building here in our community and in our county, and really excited to see this 3 years since.
It's a pleasure to be here to speak with you this evening. I'm going to focus primarily on commercially sexually exploited children. You'll hear it referred to as CSEC. I work in the child welfare system, which is where I've been for the past probably about 10, 12 years of my career, and specifically now I work as a supervisor in Larimer County. I supervise a unit that works with male and female teenagers who are involved for some reason or the other in the juvenile justice system.
People who are in the know. So it's not your responsibility to make the call on, this is trafficking, or I think that, you know, if something just doesn't sit right with you, if those little alarm bells are going off in your head, if the hairs on the back of your neck are standing up, or just something isn't right and you don't know what to do, that hotline is a really great resource, because they'll do that hard stuff. They'll figure that out. That's not on you. And that doesn't mean that I'm not going to still challenge you to educate yourselves as much as possible on the issues, but don't be afraid to use that as a tool, because you could save somebody's life even if you just have a weird hunch or a weird feeling in your gut. So I just wanted to share that with you and encourage you in that way. We've got to wrap up this part. I wish we could speak for days with you guys. You've been incredible. Thank you so much for the information, and thank you all for being such a great audience. Our evening is not over yet. Thank you for the panelists. Okay, so we're going to take a break of about 5 or 10 minutes. Stretch your legs, get a little fresh air, 5 minutes, okay, and then come back for a film called Caged No More. It's a compelling, engaging, just amazing story based on true events, and we have a treat afterwards where you, the audience, will be able to speak directly with the producer of the film.
10, 12 years of my career, and specifically now I work as a supervisor in Larimer County. I supervise a unit that works with male and female teenagers who are involved for some reason or the other in the juvenile justice system. So that's the population that I deal with, and in my unit we supervise approximately 100 kids at any given time. So I just kind of wanted to start by sharing some information with you around this population. First of all, it's estimated that basically in the course of any year annually, more than 200,000 children in the United States become victims of child sex trafficking. An additional 244,000 to 360,000 children in the United States are at risk each year of being trafficked and sexually exploited. And the at-risk youth are the youth that we're trying to get in earlier stages now than we have ever before, in the hopes that they never get into actually being trafficked or exploited. Children are most likely to be sexually exploited by their families or family friends for monetary gain. So again, we can't be complacent and believe that this doesn't happen in our community. It isn't just young people who are being trafficked by gangs or things that you would see in the media. It's also kids who are being trafficked by people that they know and love, which is extremely unfortunate. That leads me to want to talk to you guys with regards to what makes a youth vulnerable to being trafficked. And there are some, every youth is unique, I would say, and so there are different reasons for every child. But I would say that there are some things that we know now that we have had the opportunity to collect statistics around this issue for more of a long period of time. We understand that there are things like poverty, there are things like child abuse and neglect. The numbers are pretty staggering around the kids that are involved in trafficking and how that, is predicted by those who are abused and neglected in our community, including those youth who are involved in the foster care system and those youth who age out of the foster care system. Also those youth who are involved in the delinquency system. So that's a really important thing for you to know. Another thing that I kind of want to draw attention to is that the average age that youth become involved in sex trafficking is 12 to 14 years old. So I'm going to let that sit with you for a minute for those of you who have children 12 to 14 years old. So that is something that tells us that our work needs to start really early, even when it's uncomfortable to talk about these things. And, I'm honored to have my own children here, who are 6, 10, and 15. And it is our belief as a family that keeping them educated and making them aware is important today, not when they're 17 years old. So I know that it's a big call as a community to ask you to start that conversation with your children, with your children's friends, and to be aware of red flags that you're seeing and things like that. But it really, truly never is too early at this point in time. So I would just kind of, put that call out to you. The other thing that I want to point out is that some of the risk factors, individually speaking, are youth who are runaway or homeless, those who have system involvement, so again, in the delinquency system and the child welfare system. Also being lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, having substance abuse issues themselves or their parents. So those are, individual experiences. When you're looking at, experiences that are common, in terms of more generally speaking, you're looking at poverty, high crime areas, mental health issues, limited educational opportunities, and then again, the societal risk factors, which was spoken of earlier, things like the glorification of pimping and pandering. And that can be seen in the media, in music, in advertisement, in every place that you turn. So that's another reason why it's very important that you begin educating your children at a young age, because they're exposed at a young age. And it may not be in your home, but unfortunately they're not there every minute of the day. And so it's really important to start having those open conversations about that type of thing. And then the other thing is that, I really want to also bring to the forefront, the victims are not just female. So there are male victims, there are young male victims, and typically they don't report at as high of a level, and it looks differently because it is not typically, it often doesn't involve a pimp per se. However, they are involved in things like what they call survival sex, which is getting your basic needs met. But they are there, and they are significantly impacted by their victimization as well. And so I think it's really important in all the conferences that I go to, I think we often forget to give attention to the young boys that are facing this issue as well. And so I think that's really important. There are estimates that the male population of trafficking victims is actually equaling the female population. It's just much, much, much underreported. So that's definitely something for you to keep in mind as well. So the last thing that I'll say is that one is I kind of take exception to the term runaway youth, they're missing. And the reason I would encourage you to change that label is because though a youth may make a decision to leave, there may be a point that that decision isn't theirs anymore. And so I think it's really important when we're working as advocates and with law enforcement that we remember until they're found, they're missing. So that's just something I would encourage you when you're, talking to, people in the community, people, your coworkers. Just if we can change that label, that's just one thing I'd love for you guys to walk away with tonight, is that these kiddos, they're missing. Because the call to find somebody who's missing is much greater than that to find somebody who's run away. So I just would really challenge you to think on that. I can really ensure that though you may not see them on a day-to-day basis, it may not be something that you're exposed to through your own work or through your own community. We have trafficking victims in Larimer County, and we have amazing young people who are survivors. But speaking to what Megan said earlier, it's a long journey. So just because they've been rescued doesn't mean that everything's done and it's all happy and it's great. There are a lot of struggles, still being faced by them. So again, I just want to encourage you to remember we have vulnerable children in our community because any child can be vulnerable. And social media is a huge part of that. We know all of our kids are on their phones, on the internet, things like that. So it just takes the one connection with the wrong person. So I just want you to know that any kid in any community can be, sucked into this lifestyle for a variety of reasons. And that, once that happens, it's very difficult. So the more we can do to educate our kids and to ensure that we're educated, like Beth said, and that we understand the signs and things we can recognize, the better off we are, so that we can start earlier and have hope to really make a difference beforehand. Thank you.
Well, I come at the anti-trafficking effort from a little different perspective and approach. As Michelle said, wherever there is supply, there is demand. It's the basics of every economic situation. All of the boys and girls and women that are involved and captured into the sex industry is driven by a dollar sign. It's driven by the demand, and typically the demand is men. And that is something that is not often addressed in the realm of anti-trafficking. And it's a big passion of mine because I believe that trafficking is not a women's issue. I believe trafficking is a men's issue. If there was not the demand, we would not have the supply. And so I feel like we need to address the issue in the male culture, to men specifically, and I want to say to both boys, but particularly to fathers, because all of the factors that have been shared tonight that are the risk factors and the things that set a child up to be at risk of being trafficked are generally tied, but a lot of times specifically tied to the absence of a strong and good father. If we can address the home life and the father aspect of our culture, I believe that the demand would be reduced and the supply would be reduced. So I direct two organizations. One is called Restoration Project, and our focus, this is a ministry that's focusing on intentional fathering, intentional brothering, and the eradication of trafficking. And how those two things, fathering and brothering, really play a significant role in the reduction of demand. So out there you'll see at our table a couple of books and resources that are designed to help us as men be more present in our families, wake up to the reality of what our children need from us as fathers, and then what we need from other men to keep us men. That's called brothering. So specifically with Restoration Project, one of the things that I am involved in is, let me first tell you about the Counseling Center. I'm also a licensed professional counselor, and I do a lot of work with sex addiction, recovery, and the addressing of pornography and different aspects of this engagement with men. So with these two organizations, I do three things here in northern Colorado, specifically with regard to anti-trafficking. The first is I teach a training course, which I'll come into a men's group or to a church or to any group of people that I call From Boy to Buyer, because I want to address some of what has already been mentioned, that there is a culture in the masculine culture that is, as Michelle said, maybe not propels it forward, but is at least acceptable of exploitation. And that happens at a very, very early age. And a boy is pushed by certain factors towards the understanding emotionally, mentally, spiritually, psychologically, towards the acceptability of being an exploiter. And I think that we need to address that. So one of the things that I do is this training called From Boy to Buyer. And I did have the opportunity to come here to Foundations a couple of months ago and address the Saturday morning men's group with that training. It was really fun to be here, so thank you. Another thing that I do is I lead a coalition of northern Colorado churches that we are looking to address the issue of pornography and how it is the gateway drug to prostitution and the sex industry. It is every single person that is involved in the sex industry has some connection with pornography. It's used as a training ground for girls or women to know what to do. It's used as a kind of a brainwashing of men of how to view women and how to objectify women. So pornography is much more insidious than something that just happens behind closed doors in someone's private time. It is something that is very dark and very we need to address. So I lead something called Rewire, and this is, as I said, a coalition of northern Colorado churches where we're wanting to have an honest conversation about pornography. Because it's not, to be involved in an anti-pornography movement is not to say that you have a pornography problem, but to say that pornography is a problem. And that wherever there is internet access, and I'm sure many of you have smartphones in your pocket, wherever there is internet access, there is the accessibility to this kind of darkness. And we know that as girls and boys are caught in the sex industry, as Hava said, 12 to 14 years old, the pornography industry aims the first exposure to be somewhere between 8 and 10 years old, where our children are being aimed so that they can be groomed basically to be pornography users and eventually go from boy to buyer. So Rewire, we're wanting to, we are addressing this issue. We have some presentations and some materials, some training materials where we are coming in to churches to do presentations in a setting like this. Talk about pornography, what can we do to prevent it, what is some awareness around it, how to take some steps towards recovery from it, and then what to do as families in order to be protective for our kids and ourselves. We're also doing some training with pastors and lay leaders and church members that are small group leaders and such, where we are seeking to say, hey, what can you do on a much more granular level, grassroots level, to have honest conversations about this? Because you don't have many people, you say, hey, we're going to have a night about pornography, you really don't have many people show up. It's just not one of those things that's popular. So we need to actually be in those relationships that are safe. And so we're wanting to help train small group leaders and lay leaders in how to have those conversations. We're also wanting to help pastors know what to do and how to speak from the pulpit, not to take over the pulpit, but how to speak honestly about this in ways that can really bring more awareness. So that's Rewire. And then the third thing that I do locally here is something called the First Offender Restoration Initiative. And it is a collaboration between the Counseling Center that I lead. It's with the District Attorney's Office and Fort Collins Police, with Megan and Free Our Girls and the Medical Center of the Rockies, where we are addressing men that have been ticketed or arrested for the solicitation of sex. these men are the exact ones that are the demand, right? They're the ones that are seeking to pay for sex. And in the last couple of years, as Beth mentioned, the massage parlors and some other things that are happening here in Northern Colorado, we are looking to not only rescue the women, but also target the men, which is a beautiful way, I think, to reduce the demand and basically say, Northern Colorado, this is not going to happen here. This is not something that we're going to accept in our community. So these men have been ticketed or arrested, and they're going through their case. They're to work through the court systems and such. And so the First Offender Restoration Initiative is a diversion program for them, where they can come to my class and learn about the realities of the situation. This is their first offense. If it's their second, they're not eligible. If they're a sex offender on the sex offender registry, they're not eligible. It's for the first time offenders where they probably have no idea what they have been just gotten involved in. They have no idea about trafficking. They have no idea that most women who have been prostituted are being controlled by someone else. They have no idea that the girl that they were soliciting online was actually underage. They have no idea. So the class is designed to educate them. It's designed to help them understand the risk factors, the other things that go alongside of prostitution, drugs and violence and other community things that affect the community. And then also some personal things. Every man that goes to that place also has a story. He also has a backstory that has brought him there. The boy-to-buyer process has been active in his life for a very long time, and he has been unaware of that as well. We believe that, alongside of the District Attorney's Office and the Fort Collins Police, and we're working to develop with more police organizations, police departments, that it is restoration that we want to go for, not shame. We want to bring hope and say, hey, you, woman, and you, man, both are eligible for redemption. And so we want to be about the restoration of these people instead of shaming them like some other organizations and cities are doing. So that's the Restoration Initiative, and I have lots I could share about that, some statistics out there on the table, but it has been amazing to see the men who come in at the beginning of the day pretty angry that this has happened to them, pretty raw. They feel like it is their right, they feel like it was consensual, they feel like they were trapped. And then by the end of the day, to really see some transformation that happens, and where they are like, what can I do to join in the fight against trafficking? That transformation is what the Restoration Initiative is all about. So I love being able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. The purpose of my presentation today is to share with you what the DA's office is seeing. Our focus is primarily prevention and prosecution, and so I wanted to kind of go over what we're seeing in our kids. We run a juvenile diversion program whereby a minor that has committed a criminal offense, first-time offense, usually misdemeanor, instead of prosecuting them and sending them to court, we prefer to rather have them go through our diversion program and divert their charges from court. That way they don't end up with criminal history, because even if a juvenile, if they're charged with a crime and convicted, that is a permanent record. And so we want to prevent that from happening. And in the process of going through our screenings for juveniles, I've noticed a trend, and I wanted to talk about the statistics and kind of what we're seeing with those kids and how at risk they are of becoming trafficked. And so I crossed out human trafficking because what we're seeing, first of all, it's a term that it confuses a lot of people, so I'll say sex trafficking, or even to get more specific, commercial sexual exploitation of minors. And so the next slide, if you could go to that. I threw in some stats. Juveniles recovered, this is from the Innocence Lost Task Force by the FBI. Juveniles recovered in 2013, there's a number in 2014, and they're still working on 2015 numbers, they don't have those, but what I did find out in 2015, of the 2 cross-country stings that where 135 cities participated in, Denver was the #1 2 years in a row of minors recovered in human trafficking. Another statistic is Denver-based pimps are the second highest paid in the nation. So it's pretty active. And in Larimer County, Fort Collins girls that have come through our diversion program, we currently have 6 missing. They're runaways, but they are missing. We do not know where they are. And we are suspecting they have been trafficked or are being trafficked because one of the sisters of one of the girls was on the endangered runaway bulletin, and I don't know if you get those. And so we think 2 are in California, 1 in Colorado Springs, 3 in Greeley, and 1 we don't know where she is. And that's current. That's the ones that we know of. And these are diversion kids. And what makes diversion a little unique, they're not kids that are really in the criminal justice system yet. These are first-time offenses, and so they haven't been charged with a crime. But Hava will tell you they're the same kinds of kids. That's what's next. So we really try to work with them beforehand. So that's Larimer County statistics. We have approximately 500 kids that come through our diversion program. It's just to give you an idea of the numbers. These aren't all traffic kids. These are just first-time offenders. And of those, the majority are girls. And I want to talk about high risk. And if you can show the next slide. So 3 things needed for human trafficking to occur. I remember sitting on a panel like this a couple years ago, and one of the speakers mentioned these 3 things, and I wanted to highlight that. A vulnerable at-risk population, viable perpetrators, and a community that denies existence. I want to focus on the vulnerable population, because that's our girls, that our kids that are coming through diversion program. And the risk factors that we see typically, you can go to the next slide. Let me focus on this first. Law enforcement is seeing a big increase of juveniles being trafficked due to the high demand of prostitution. And so I thought, I was going to start this conversation by saying, how many of you think there's a prostitution problem? Well, that's kind of a vague term. What do you mean by prostitution problem? So let me share with you an interview that I saw conducted by Fort Collins Police of a female they arrested for prostitution. And I don't like the term prostitute because of 90% of them, as the statistics say, are in it because of being forced. They're victims. I don't like the term prostitute, but she was being interviewed, and they asked her, because she was from out of state and came here to Fort Collins to work, and they asked her, well, why come here? And she laughed. She goes, this is where the money is. And it's a huge problem. And one of the officers in Fort Collins that's been mentioned, that they run the John Stings. And if you go on Backpage and the ads that people post, and there's so much of it out here. Well, anytime you have that, you're going to have minors being trafficked. The connection is always there. And so I like what Chris is doing, because they think it's consensual and they're upset and they're angry, but they don't realize the connections to minors being trafficked in this. And a strong possibility exists you'll come across some minor soliciting services. If you go on Backpage.com, I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. It's like a Craigslist site. You will see minors. There's a guarantee you will see them. Okay, so the next slide. The risk factors for victimization, and this has been touched on actually already, but prior sexual abuse, runaways, mental health disorders, and so forth. What we come across in our diversion program primarily are runaways and prior sex assault victims. If a girl's coming in on a first-time offense for shoplifting, there is an 80% chance that she's been a victim of sex assault, she's a cutter, mental health issues, and what's next, if she's running away, we know trafficking is she's at high risk for that. In Larimer County, we have a huge runaway problem. The majority of the girls that we come across in the diversion program have run away several times. It doesn't necessarily mean things are that bad at home. It can mean that, a lot of times it is, but it doesn't always mean that. I'm not sure why they're running away as much as they are, but and Allison will maybe share some stats, but I looked at her website. Once they run away, there's a huge chance of being trafficked within a certain amount of time. And so that's caused great concern for us. Next slide. Mental health disorders, obviously, and these are pretty obvious things. And a lot of the juveniles coming through our diversion program have mental health issues. A lot of them in the criminal justice system have significant mental health issues. So they're extremely high risk for being trafficked. Substance abuse, one of the things about marijuana becoming legal in Colorado is that is now the go-to drug for these juveniles. They won't take their mental health meds if they have any prescribed to them. If they're depressed, this is what they're going after. And I talk to these kids and I say, "Are you paying for this?" And they laugh at me because it's such abundance, they don't have to pay for it. It's free, it's everywhere. So they're not even paying for it. And it's daily use. It's a huge issue. Next slide. So this was mentioned too earlier. There's so much in our culture, and songs and music and videos, internet is sexuality. Kids have become so sexualized. Even the term pimp is no longer negative that you mentioned anymore. And so in March of 2014, I remember a girl coming through our diversion program. She was a junior at Kruger High School, a runaway, and just got out of mental health Mountain Crest for addiction. It was a marijuana ticket, no criminal history. And I couldn't understand why she was running away. Her home life was, with what I thought was good. But it surprised me that once I started seeing the red flags of her being a victim of trafficking, because there was a lot of other factors that I won't get into that alerted me to it. I just thought it seemed like a big jump between first-time offender, no criminal history, coming in on a marijuana possession ticket, to suddenly being trafficked. And when I realized, the more I researched this, looked into it, and started asking around what's happening to our kids, that jump is very small. It's not a big jump like I thought. They could very easily get involved in trafficking, and they have been. And so part of that, I believe, it plays into it, because it's not looked at as a negative stereotype sometimes, as it should be. So, do we have a human trafficking problem in Larimer County? We talk about global issues, we talk about Denver statistics, national statistics. What about where we live, where you guys live and work? Is there a problem? As I've tried to educate people about this issue, I would tell you that the perception is no. People do not think it's an issue. And what I want you to know is it's a huge issue. It is a big problem. We may not have the numbers of some of the bigger cities, but we have a lot of issues. So we have a runaway problem, we have a homelessness problem, mental health issues. We have kids that people are looking for them. And if they're running away, and they have these risk factors at play in their lives, they're going to get trafficked, because we've seen it already. Next slide. So I want to go back to this. I talked about a vulnerable at-risk population and viable perpetrators. So are they out there looking for your kids? They absolutely are. And it's not always, the term pimp comes up a lot, but we had a girl that was a runaway that was not pimped out, but because she was a runaway, she came across some adults that made her do things to provide food and shelter, and that's human trafficking. They weren't pimps, but they took advantage of her. So there's the commercial exploitation. And community that denies existence. So who works with the vulnerable at-risk population? A lot of us do. DHS, advocacy groups, therapists, a lot of people work with them. Who goes after viable perpetrators? Law enforcement, DA's office, prosecutions, a lot. But who's dealing with the community that denies existence? That's you guys. And that's where we need you, because I think we have some great people in great programs and organizations that do the first two. But if a community that denies the existence, our hands are tied if that happens. We can't do it. And that's why I'm so grateful that you guys are here tonight, because the most important piece to that is you guys. We need the help. I have runaways that I don't have a place for them to go if they're running away. I don't have a choice but to get a warrant out for their arrest and get them detained, and then now they're in the criminal justice system. These aren't bad kids. These aren't major crimes that they've committed. But if they're running away, I have no place for them. I don't have any kind of respite home for them. Nothing where I can say, hey, don't run away to the street. Come here instead. You know? So our focus has been on prevention, is on prevention. And so anytime we have high-risk girls that we feel are high risk for trafficking, I've worked with Beth and CSU to implement her program, prevention curriculum, but we need more. We need more help, and that's where a community comes in. And so that's where I love sharing and talking about the issue with people like you, because you're the voice of change. And so the next slide is, be the change you wish to see in the world. That's a Gandhi quote. I love that quote, because if you want to see change, you guys have to do it. We need your help. So thank you.